I mean, that's, for me, as a journalist and as a documentary film.
Right. So you're saying fennel, are you saying fennel?
I think most people.
Sure.
I don't think we've met.
Jared Royce.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to meet
Hello,
you.
welcome to Basic
At
Track
the YMCA.
at the Boston Public Library.
Oh,
I'm Donna
that's
Lester.
where I've heard that name.
I've been in trouble
And
before.
King,
Maybe
1,
you
2,
saw it
3,
on the
4,
news.
5, 6.
How's that sound? Good.
I introduced
There.
myself. My name
Black here at the Boston Public Library. I'm Donna Latson-Gittins, your host for today's discussion. And what we're going to talk about today is swimming. The summer months are usually a time to slow down and enjoy the weather. It's also a time when many of us get together with friends and family and make our way to the pool to cool off and to really just relax, take a deep swim. But sometimes when it comes to swimming, there's a long history of racial segregation and discrimination, along with cultural and economic reasons why many people of color to this day do not or have never learned how to swim. Our panel today will help us understand the history, along with the importance of water safety and learning how to swim. Joining me today is documentary filmmaker and journalist Clennon King, civil rights activist Mimi Jones, and Jarrett Royster, Executive Vice President of Operations at the YMCA of Greater Boston. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries. So for today, for many people, the idea of learning how to swim and discrimination seems foreign. How is there such a deep history of the lack of access to swimming? We'll start with you, Clennon.
Well, I could say that I know that there are old pictures of us down south. I'm from Albany, Georgia, and we were baptized in the river. And so at one level, I kind of push back at that because I do think that we had some familiarity with the water independent of what we know as a YMCA swimming pool. And when, one of the things that I did, one of my first documentaries that I did was about Mimi Jones in part. And one of the things that was consistent with this theory was the fact that where she learned, according to her, was in a creek or a river. You can tell yourself.
Yeah, I actually learned to swim when I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old, but I was taught by my older sisters and brothers who could swim. And we lived in Worth County, the county that's right next to Dougherty County, where I grew up in Albany. And the only pool that black people, or water for swimming, that black people had was not a traditional swimming pool, but in a creek. So we literally had to go to the creek to swim. And water, in terms of water safety, has its own issues. It's a larger issue other than swimming. That's why I talk about water safety. And that is as important, I think more important than just swimming, is learning water safety.
And I think, Jarrett, you can speak to that, but very specifically, why have people of color, both black and brown people, never learned to swim?
Yeah, I mean, we live in America, and America has a history of racism and discrimination, and racism and discrimination has impacted the black identity. Too many young black kids don't see themselves as being a future Michael Phelps. They might identify with being Michael Jordan, but not Michael Phelps. And so we partly got to shape the black identity, how young people envision themselves and their possibilities in the future. Swimming is not, I agree with Mimi, a recreational skill, it's a life skill, just like riding a bike. It shouldn't be a choice, it should be mandatory. And so we got to shape the way we frame swim lessons differently in the public narrative so kids see it, and families see it, and communities see it as a responsibility to teach kids to swim. Not some kids, but all kids.
When we were chatting, oh, go ahead, Clennon.
But no, Donna, but I've got to say this, and I'm curious what you and Mimi's thoughts are on this. I do think that there are cultural barriers where it concerns black people. And what I mean by that is, growing up as a black man or black in the South, I knew that getting darker, my skin getting darker, was not attractive. I'm saying to you culturally, I'm saying to you that my skin being ashy was not attractive. And so in both of these equations, you're talking about putting your body in water where after it comes out, you're going to be ashy. You're talking about as well getting darker because this, for the most part, is an outdoor sport. And the third thing, especially where it concerns women, is
Tell me
this
about
challenge
it.
regarding
Mimi,
hair.
do you want to address that?
Hair, honey.
There,
Well,
there you
it's
go.
true.
It is.
Hair.
It is.
These
Absolutely.
are cultural things that we're dealing with. So
Absolutely.
there's some of this stuff we've got to own
That's
and say,
correct.
is this really, really important? But, that's what I have found. But as I don't think that that ultimately is any excuse for us not owning our own situation and securing our own health.
But even with a swim cap, the water still seeps through. And when black women have their hair done once a week or once every 2 weeks, they don't want it to get water on it, okay?
Yeah, and it's not just about your hair. It's
Yeah.
how
No,
we
it isn't.
perceive
Absolutely.
getting in the water. And I'm going to
That
speak
is
to you, Clinton, about your experiences. You almost drowned twice. Talk about what that experience
Well,
was
both
like.
of these were in New England. Interestingly enough, I was with my sons. I was at a gorge that was about 165 feet deep, and it was called Quechee Gorge. And it's kind of near where Dartmouth is, halfway up in off the Connecticut. But it's in Quechee Gorge, and my sons were kind of swimming on the side, and I was taking pictures. They said, "Dad, put down the camera and get in." And I got in, and my older son said to me, "Come on, Dad, let's go in the middle of the thing, and let's float downriver." And I said, "Okay." Because it was so shallow, it was so narrow. And so I got in the water, and he was looking at me, and all of a sudden, I felt myself being pulled under. And suddenly, I went under, and I began panicking a bit. And I said, "Holy crap, what's going to happen is I'm going to drown in front of my sons. And I can't let that happen." And that's when I said to myself, I have got to relax, because if I don't relax, I'm going to die in front of them. And so as soon as I relaxed, I slowly but surely began floating to the surface. That was the first episode. And then about 4 years ago, I was at Chappaquiddick, a place called Cape Pogue, which is not far from Edgartown. And I was swimming with my brother-in-law. And he's white, and he's German, and he's a very strong swimmer. And then he swam across, swam back, and I said, "I want to do that." And I jump in, and I got halfway across, and I got tired. I got really, really tired, and he said, do you need help? And I said, "No, I'm fine." And I started again, and the shore seemed to be farther and farther away. He says, basically, "Do you need help?" And I didn't say anything. And then he says,
when he
"Okay."
knew you
He says,
needed
I'm going to take you, but don't you touch me. I'm going to take you to the shore." And so he grabbed my arm, and he brought me to the shore. But in the end, it was about relaxing. You have to relax.
Well, that's a great segue to Jared.
Yeah, it's interesting that most drownings actually happen in lower, shallow water. Most people's perception is drowning happens in deep, but it's actually low or shallow. It's why swim safety is so important. We could have literally saved some folks' life by simply reaching out our hand and grabbing them and pulling them to the side, or relaxing so that we can float. Most of us float naturally. But I will also want to add, though, there are a lot of stereotypes that shape how black children of color or poor children see themselves relative to swimming. I grew up believing that because I had low body fat, that I wasn't as buoyant, and because I wasn't as buoyant, I shouldn't swim. Well, here's the truth. I too learned, almost drowned, then I learned to swim. I became a swim instructor, because one of the things we're committed to at the Y is making sure kids have people who look like themselves in those roles so they can envision that opportunity. But when I took my swim test, I actually sank to the bottom with a life preserver on and never came up. That's scary. I don't want to be on the Titanic, by the way. But that low buoyancy didn't prevent me from learning the skill of swimming, right?
But you were also a lifeguard.
I was a lifeguard at that. I was a lifeguard after I learned how to swim, and then as an adult, recognizing the importance of being a role model for other children who look like me. Because part of it is about having people who look like you and providing access to pools. And my last point here is not only about providing access, it's about making sure that we have high quality instruction. I grew up in a pool as a young man where there was no instruction. So I had my practice was to jump off the diving board into a body of the water where I can come up and get grabbed to the side. Imagine if there was no ledge, right? Because I didn't know how to swim.
Well, you can speak to that,
In
Mimi.
later years, I wanted to make sure that I knew all of the aspects of swimming, okay? When our son, first of all, when our son Gervais was 4 or 5 years old, I wanted to make sure that he knew how to swim. So I took him to the Y. We enrolled him at the Y here. And as a parent, you had to get in the pool with them when they're that age, 4 or 5 years old. And that is where he learned that he had buoyancy, and that's where he started to learn to swim. He is an excellent swimmer till this day, and he's right there.
Well, what are some of the reasons why people of color don't learn to swim? Where does that come from?
One of the issues, I think there's this history and legacy of discrimination against people of color. We've seen it today on Facebook where black folks are visiting outdoor pools and public settings and they're getting policed by some person who doesn't feel like they belong. That's real in our country. There's also a systemic issue around adults who don't swim and perpetuate their fear of water on their children. 60% or 65% of children who are black in this country don't have the skill of swimming. And many of them we could associate with their lack of parents swimming. So at the Y, one of our strategies is to have what we call a dual generation strategy, both teaching the child and the adult to swim. Because then we begin to change the perception and the mindset, the identity of the kid that I can too.
Mr. Royster, I mean, I want to dovetail on something that I think is really groundbreaking about the Y. Twice a week, I go to the YMCA in Roxbury, where there is an 82-year-old black man, no-nonsense black man, who sits there, and he teaches. Most of these women are between the ages of 70 and 85 years old. And these are all black women, and there are a couple of black men like myself. And we get in there, and he does aerobics. And he's managed to transition some of these people from basically doing aerobics to learning how to swim. But at the end of the day, what he says is, you know, the bottom line is you have got to learn to relax. That's the only thing that in the end is going to stem this whole idea of drowning. And I guess it goes to this core point, and that is black folk need to stop thinking about about swimming as a sport that you can take or leave, but rather a life-saving skill that is just, critical. You've just got to learn how to master it.
Well, but let me turn the conversation a little bit to segregation, because, based in this history of blacks just jumping in the creek or jumping off a cliff into the water, Mimi, you had a life-changing experience swimming in a pool that wasn't meant for us. Speak to that.
Absolutely. Well, as he indicated earlier, we're from Albany, Georgia. And in the summer of '64, in St. Augustine, Florida, there was all kind of racism and everything going on. And so they invited Dr. King to come in to support that campaign. And so the minister of my church, a whole busload of us, left Albany. It's about 2 hours from Albany to St. Augustine. So we went down to support, and even some of I think my French teacher and other teachers went. So there was a whole busload of us that went to St. Augustine, and I was about 15 years old then, okay? And so we marched through the streets of St. Augustine. There's a slave market there. We met. There were mass meetings at the slave market right near the water. Slaves are brought in, and they're brought right to the slave market. And that slave market is still there today. And it should be there because all of us need to know the history of slavery in this country. So if you ever go to St. Augustine, Florida, visit the center and go to that slave market. So we went to the slave market, and there were mass meetings, and then we'd go back to the hotel. So they said, there's I think it was called the Monson Motor Lodge. They would not allow Dr. King or any black people to stay there. However, any of the white people that were there could go to stay at the Monson Motor Lodge and swim in that swimming pool. No black people were allowed. So they said, okay, J.T. Johnson, who's from Albany, who himself was a lifeguard in Albany, he said, why don't we do this? Why don't we have a dive-in, a swim-in at the Monson Motor Lodge, the pool that's there? It wasn't a huge pool. So they asked, who can swim? I said, I can. Would you? I said, yes, I will. So had I not known how to swim, I could not have raised my hand and said, yes, I will be one of those people. So myself, another black woman from Albany State who could swim. There were 3 other white guys who were there from other parts of the country who were swimmers. J.T. Johnson, who was a lifeguard in our hometown. So when we got to the hotel, we got a bathing suit. I think I may have brought a bathing suit anyway, because we were going to Florida. And there was press from all over the world. Literally all over the world. They were surrounding the pool because they had alerted them, the press. They were from Denmark, they were from Europe, so that is why so anyway, we dove into the pool. And I didn't even know what was happening. I didn't see him coming, but the manager of that, his name was James Brock, or Jimmy Brock. He was managing the Monson Motor Lodge then. I swam to the center of the pool, and then I swam back, and before I knew it, I couldn't breathe because the water was bubbling up like this in front of me, and I could barely breathe. As it turned out, he was literally pouring muriatic acid in the pool on us, and he was aiming for my face.
Whoa.
And I'm just so glad that the acid hit the pool, the water. That's why, I could. And the irony of it is that the policemen were all around. They came and ushered us out, and they arrested us, not the terrorists who were pouring acid on the pool, in the pool on us. They arrested all of us and carted us off to jail. That's why. So when he poured the acid in the pool, I screamed. So that iconic photo that you've probably seen, and if you Google acid in pool, Monson Motor Lodge, that young teenage girl who's screaming like this, that photo went around the world. This is poetic justice now.
Well, I thank you for that, Mimi. It is an iconic photo, and I'm sorry you experienced that. But also, Clinton, you did a documentary just on this thing.
Well, I did. There was a black female. I do want to say something real quickly regarding the fact that Mimi and I are both from Albany, Georgia. And at one point, there was a fight, even during that civil rights campaign, about desegregating a public pool. And the newspaper owner, who's from Springfield, Massachusetts, a guy by the name of James Gray, basically, to circumvent keeping it all white, because they, my father, who was a lawyer there, tried to sue to desegregate the pool. He basically bought the pool from the city
To keep
and made it private, and it was
Made
still
it
all
private.
white, and that's how he circumvented it. But no, the video you're talking about that I did, in large part, I'm not sure which of the two that you're talking about, but there was one. This was back in probably about 20 years ago. There was a black female TV news reporter who drowned in the river at Jacksonville. And she was actually doing a report in the middle of the river, and she took off her life vest because she thought it made her look too busty. And as a result, she ended up drowning, and then I ended up doing a story on how widespread this problem was about drownings in the black community. And even Michael Jordan, with all of his athletic prowess, does not know how to swim. You think about half the NFL, you think about so much of the NBA, that is a serious problem for us within the context of our community.
So, Jared, there is like 70% of African Americans can't swim. How do we turn that tide, no pun intended, how do we turn that around?
I think there's three things that are important. One is we got to create a community of caring people that surround our children and our families and change the public perception, again, of swimming as a recreational sport to a life skill. And so when I think about partners, the why we're partnering with Boston Public School System to make sure every second grader can swim. And it's part of building it into the curriculum of the school. It's working with Save the Harbor and Save the Bay to help teach kids about our waterways and how the beautiful and transformative experience you could have interacting with them, right? I've had great, wonderful, life-changing experiences around water that are meaningful. So we got to partner with others. We also got to provide access, make sure those pools in those communities are accessible. Too often, pools in low-income communities and communities of color get closed or managed well. They're just lifeguards and not swim instruction. So we got to make sure that there's access to pools, but when there's access, there's also instruction, high-quality instruction happen at those pools. And the third, and I think is critical, is hiring staff of color to reflect the communities that we have pools in. Because when you see somebody who's doing an incredible thing you want to do, it just changes how you feel about yourself on the inside. So those are three things I think we got to do together as a community.
But on that point that he's talking about, tailoring it especially to black folk to make it conducive and attractive, one of the things that they do at the Y in Roxbury, which I love, is they turn up the heat. That is, the water is warmer. And as a rule,
Yes.
when I go to other
Sarah,
white...
do you
when-
find that to be
Oh,
the case?
I'm just saying to you, I mean, that's what they
Oh,
do
yeah.
there. There's music,
yeah.
and they
Oh,
turn
yeah.
up the heat, and
The
the
music.
water feels different. And I'm saying to you,
Yeah.
we got 20, 70-plus-year-old black women in the pool, and they're there to work. They're there to work out and do what they need to do, and they make it attractive. And so my hat off to the YMCA for doing that and being culturally really tailoring their programming to deal with this problem.
Yeah, pool temperature does matter to a lot of people.
Certainly does.
Lap swimmers like it a little chilly, and folks recreational or just having a good time like a little hotter. I tend myself to like the water a little hotter. I don't want to take a bath in it, but I also don't want to freeze when I put my toe in it. So pool temperature is an interesting thing for us to consider. And culturalize it to have music that's appropriate and an environment that's appropriate, having staff smile when you walk through the gates or walk through that door to make you feel like you're welcome. Those are all important things to change in the way the perception is of people related to swimming.
One of the things, I mean, we talk about access, and part of access is cost. Is it expensive to go swimming? Is it, I happen to live around the corner from the Dorchester Y. It's, I learned to swim, and my 4 siblings, we all learned to swim at the Y. We're in New England, we're not in Florida. Cold water in the ocean, but, you can go to the pool and have a good time. What's the cost to do that, to join, to learn how to swim?
So it's relative to the organization you get involved in, right? And at the Y, we make it affordable. We do not turn anybody away for the inability to pay. So a person out in Reading might pay $100, and a person in Dorchester might pay $40. It's dependent upon your income, and I think that's really important, into providing access, making it affordable to everybody who wants to participate.
Speaking of the Dorchester Y, because I wanted to learn all aspects of swimming, I wanted the lifeguard training, the whole works. And it was the Dorchester Y, okay? And they have an Olympic-sized pool there, okay? There was a woman there named Dottie Craven. She was from, do you know Dottie Craven?
No.
Well, anyway, she was the rector of swimming and everything there. She was from Quincy. I think she was Irish. The woman was the absolute very best. But because I could already swim very well, I took lifeguard training. And because I wanted to do lifeguard training, because if I ever had to save anyone in a pool, I could, dive in, turn them around, catch them like this. And I can do that even till this day. I had lifeguard training. I got my license in several years. I may have to have, because you have to have these things renewed after so long to make sure that you have the skill. The one thing that I want to say about water, it is so wonderful and so relaxing, but it can also be very unforgiving. So you need to be mindful. I mean, you can jump in the water and you can scull all day, okay? You can prone float, you can whatever, if you have the skills. But if you don't, water can be very
I think Glennon makes the best
unforgiving.
point,
Yes.
talking about relaxing.
Relaxing.
Yes.
That's the key to
Relaxing.
the whole thing.
And I don't want anybody to be deceived. I mean, the reality is I know how to swim. I knew how to swim when I was in both of those situations. I know how to swim. I've been on swim teams. Even at that point, what saved my life in the end is this idea that I had to relax. I could not panic. That is what's going to kill me. If I panic, and I realized that, and I just said, okay, so you're going to have to keep a cool head. This is what's going to happen. We'll see what happens. So.
Because if you panic, you're just going to do this, and you're going right under.
Right. Is there any right age? Should you start with an infant? What's the age that
We serve, I mean, there's families and there's communities who the day their children are born, they're dumping them in the water.
I had Javis in the pool when he was 6 months old, right at the Y up this.
Yeah, our program starts at 6 months to adult.
Had
You
him
could
in
be
there at
you
6.
could be 6 months, or you could be 99.
That's right.
Or 105. We have a place for you in the Y. The water is unforgiving, but the water is absolutely unadulterated fun. It could be your friend. Life-changing experiences, being able to go to a beach or go on a cruise and have all these experiences that some people often take for granted.
Thank you all very
Acclimate
much.
yourself to the
It's
water.
been a great conversation. Thanks for your insight, your expertise, and your courage in the water. Thank you, Glennon, Mimi, and Jarrett. And we'll see you next time for another edition of Basic Black Facebook Live.
Thank you so much.